$7 billion, not in gold, not in oil, in weapons. And they didn't land in New York or Moscow or Tel Aviv. They landed in Burkina Faso, one of the world's poorest nations. No flags, no news crews, no explanations, just 5 Antonov cargo planes in the dead of night. And one name rising in every classified briefing from Brussels to DC, Ibrahim Traoré. Who sent these weapons? Who received them? And what is this young African leader preparing for? In a world where Africa is expected to beg, one man prepares to resist. Not with bombs, but with truth, silence, and fire. If you believe Africa's awakening has already begun, stay to the end. Burkina Faso receives massive military shipment of unknown origin. Al Jazeera, April 21, 2025. It sounded like a mystery, but it wasn't. It was a message. Satellite images confirmed it. 5 Antonov AN-124s, the largest cargo planes on Earth, landed in Ouagadougou within 48 hours, each loaded with sealed containers. Each unloaded without a single press camera in sight. No government statement, no customs documentation, just blurry photos, and a continent holding its breath. Western analysts panicked. Speculations exploded. Is Traoré preparing for war? Is Burkina Faso arming a rebel faction? Is this a Russian proxy move? But what none of them realized was this. It wasn't about war. It was about independence. Because 3 days after the last plane touched down, President Ibrahim Traoré expelled the French ambassador, suspended the World Bank's energy deal, and ordered the termination of every mining license issued before 2022. Then he gave a short statement: if you control a nation's minerals, you control its destiny. From this day forward, our destiny is ours alone. That week, 3 CEOs vanished. A Canadian arms consultant was stopped at the border and quietly deported. And satellite data picked up a convoy hundreds of kilometers long relocating equipment inland. But the real story hadn't even begun, because behind every sealed container was a signal. Burkina Faso wasn't just receiving weapons, it was breaking the script. The question wasn't what landed. The question was, who did Traoré outmaneuver? Ibrahim Traoré knew something most leaders ignore. You don't fight an empire on the battlefield. You bleed it in the shadows. 6 months before the Antonovs touched down, the war had already begun, not with tanks, but with whispers. He assembled a task force unknown to even his own cabinet. No generals, no bureaucrats, just believers. A Burkinabe hacker named Zita trained in Poland. A former African Union prosecutor disillusioned by what she called aid diplomacy. A Senegalese data miner. A retired Russian arms analyst. And a whistleblower and ex-intelligence pilot from Mali burned by betrayal. Their mission: trace the invisible wires, follow the deals, unmask the networks. Because Traoré suspected the truth. The so-called development aid flooding West Africa wasn't aid at all. It was the cover story. What lay underneath was far more dangerous weapons for resources, governments for sale, Africa for lease. Then came the breach. Zita cracked a private defense server based in Belgium. Encrypted files, redacted logs, confidential memos. Inside, a $7 billion military package allegedly for regional stability. Distribution maps marked with symbols of humanitarian corridors. Internal notes hinting at post-uprising leadership stabilization. And most chilling of all, serial numbers for weapons already found on Burkina Faso soil. This wasn't security. This was preparation for chaos on their terms. That night, Traoré held a quiet meeting in a power outage. No phones, just candles and a single printed map laid across a wooden table. He whispered, "If this is their plan, then let's give them a surprise they didn't write." The next 90 days moved like a silent chess game. Traoré didn't raise alarms, he raised watchers. Every inbound cargo labeled medical aid was scanned. Every mid-level airport official was bribed not with euros, but with loyalty and promises of a country reborn. He embedded agents into airport logistics under cover of construction crews. He repurposed abandoned weather towers into satellite relays to intercept foreign surveillance pings. He tracked every plane, every truck, every crate. And then he reached out to a ghost codename Agnes, once a diplomat stationed in Chad, now disillusioned, disappeared, and ready to burn the map. Through her, Traoré acquired a sealed document from inside the European Defense Council. The title, Operation Cinder Gold. The goal: destabilize Burkina Faso's eastern border, fund tribal conflict via proxy militias, overwhelm the government's legitimacy. Jassad, then install a new leader, French-speaking, foreign-educated, fully owned, and in exchange, full mining rights to lithium, gold, and uranium reserves until 2065. Buried in the attachments were photos of pallets of weapons routed through humanitarian flights marked UNWFP. This wasn't theory. This was a playbook, and Traoré had just flipped to the final page. He looked around the room of his war council and said, calm as steel, "They plan to burn our home and sell the ashes, so we'll strike first with the truth." The next phase had begun. 4:00 a.m., Ouagadougou, total blackout, no internet, no foreign satellites, no outside eyes. What looked like a power failure was in fact the ignition of Project Kankeletigi Mandenka for the one who speaks the truth. Traoré's team used a 6-hour window, a dead zone engineered by hacking satellite relays to make their move. 9 military convoys rolled out across the nation. 3 airports were locked down by special forces. 15 executives from foreign-backed mining companies were placed under arrest quietly, precisely without fanfare. Across the border, analysts scrambled to understand what was happening. Was this a coup, a civil war? But when the lights came back on, there was no chaos. There was a face. Ibrahim Traoré appeared on state television, not in a suit, in fatigues. His voice calm, but thunderous. "We have intercepted not a war, but a transaction. Not terrorists, but profiteers. They came not with guns, but with contracts, wires, and silence." That ends today. He declared null and void every military contract signed between 1999 and 2022. He nationalized all foreign-controlled weapons shipments on Burkina Faso soil, and he invited the world to witness what those Antonovs had carried. In a live broadcast, the containers were opened. German missile parts, Israeli drone kits, American rifles, Chinese surveillance towers, all marked as communications aid. The press spun it as confusion, as paranoia, as overreach. But on the ground, the people knew. It wasn't a scandal, it was a revolution. By noon that same day, Burkina Faso was no longer quiet. It was roaring. From dusty crossroads to city plazas, the people came not in fear, but in fire. Hundreds of thousands filled the streets. Children held signs, "Our gold, our land, our guns. We are not your experiment." In Kaya, veterans of old colonial campaigns donned their uniforms again, this time to defend their soil from pens, not bullets. Farmers marched with machetes raised not in violence, but in defiance. In Bobo Dioulasso, mothers formed human chains around government buildings. University students spray-painted walls with 3 words, "Never again foreign rule." At the heart of it all, Traoré stood not as a president, but as a signal. A broken chain reforged into steel. That night, he stood atop the National Assembly steps, flanked by no security, just the flag of Burkina Faso and his people. For decades, we've been called unstable, dangerous, a threat to peace. But what is peace if it is built on stolen gold? What is stability if it is chained to debt? They do not fear our weapons. They fear our clarity. In response, France issued a statement condemning the nationalization, calling it a violation of international norms. Traoré's reply: "If theft is your norm, then we reject your normal." The 5 Antonovs still sat on the tarmac silent, but across the country, a different kind of cargo had landed: pride, memory, fire, and none of it could be unshipped, and now justice would speak in its loudest voice yet. The next 48 hours changed everything. Western embassies scrambled, think tanks issued urgent memos. International media spun every headline they could. Burkina Faso enters dangerous new phase. Traoré's radicalism threatens stability. Who is really funding the uprising? But inside the presidential war room, clarity had never been sharper. Traoré ordered the immediate seizure of 27 private military outposts operating under the guise of humanitarian security. In the north, an airstrip used for covert extractions was shut down. In the west, a convoy carrying mining equipment marked Belgian Geological Team was intercepted inside advanced surveillance gear and encrypted sat phones. Then came the data drop. Under Project Kankiletigi, Traoré released over 4,000 classified documents across national airwaves, village radios, and mobile networks. They included wire transfers between NGOs and offshore arms brokers, voice recordings of Western diplomats mocking African sovereignty, maps of evacuation routes for foreign executives in the event of a successful coup. Even one chilling memo, Burkina Faso, must be kept volatile enough to justify intervention, but not unified enough to resist. That line spread like wildfire. Across Africa, leaders fell silent, but the people they spoke. In Niger, marches began. In Mali, murals of Traoré appeared overnight. In Ghana, students held teach-ins titled How to Read a Coup in Reverse, and in the Sahel, a whisper began to form, one that no drone dollar or diplomatic cable could stop. The blacksmith of Africa has begun to hammer. There was no marble chamber, no red-carpeted courtroom, no hand-picked foreign judges flown in to maintain order. The tribunal was held in Koudougou, under a dome made of Sahel timber and sweat. No air conditioning. Just breath, dust, and history. 7 judges. 3 from Burkina Faso. 2 from South America. 2 from Southeast Asia. None from Europe. None from NATO nations. And seated before them not criminals with guns, but with pens. 2 former Burkinabe ministers, 1 former UN consultant, 5 executives from foreign resource firms, all under arrest, all charged with economic treason and conspiracy to sabotage a sovereign state. Traoré did not hide behind walls. He walked into the tribunal with no bodyguards, just a folder of files and a nation at his back. He looked to the panel and said, "We are not here to beg. We are not here to ask for mercy. We are here to remember, because without memory, there is no justice, only repetition." The evidence was surgical, maps showing weapons drop zones, contracts exchanging lithium mines for stabilization services, surveillance footage of bribery exchanges in embassies, leaked chat logs between NGO leaders discussing controlled unrest strategies, and one voice memo recorded 2 years ago. Burkina Faso is a strategic fault line. Break it right and the whole Sahel falls. The room fell silent, then a murmur, then a chant outside the dome where thousands had gathered under tarps and loudspeakers. We are not the fault line. We are the continent. If you too believe truth must be spoken, leave your word for Africa below. On the second day of the tribunal, Ibrahim Traoré did the unthinkable. He called himself to testify. The court gasped. His counsel objected. But Traoré stood calm and unshaken. If I claim to serve the people, then I must also answer to them. He was sworn in, not with a Bible or Quran, but with the Constitution of Burkina Faso in one hand and a photo of a child from Dori who died in a mine collapse in the other. This child, he said, holding it high, never signed a trade deal. He never spoke French, but he paid for someone's profit with his life. He revealed timelines. When intelligence first intercepted Operation Cinder Gold, when foreign contractors began purchasing land under fake names, when satellites from 4 countries circled Burkinabe skies in a 3-week pattern, then came the core of his message. This was not a mistake. It was design. Not a lapse in diplomacy, but a blueprint for control. We do not seek revenge. We seek recognition. For 90 minutes, he answered questions openly, precisely, without notes. And when asked why he released the Antonov weapons list to the public, he replied, because the world deserved to know what peacekeeping really looks like when the cameras are gone. The court adjourned for the day. Outside, people wept not from fear, but from a feeling many had forgotten dignity. The final day of the tribunal felt less like a courtroom and more like a funeral for deception. One by one, the judges delivered their verdicts. The former ministers guilty of high treason, stripped of honors, sentenced to lifetime exile without appeal. The UN consultant, guilty of foreign collusion and falsification of humanitarian channels, deported and banned from all Sahel nations. The 5 executives found liable for crimes against sovereignty, their company's assets seized, their operations permanently barred from West African soil. Then came the final judgment, not from the bench, but from the people. Traoré signed the National Memory Decree, declaring the tribunal's proceedings a core subject in every Burkinabe school. The history of betrayal and resistance would be taught not as trauma, but as armor. That night, a grandmother in a radio interview said, "They stole our resources, our voices, and even our stories, but now our children will learn the truth in our own tongue." And then on a small wooden podium beneath a sky, now free of drones, Ibrahim Traoré gave the closing address. They called it aid. We called it erosion. They called it peace. We saw plunder. But today, we call it justice. He looked into the lens of the camera. No script, just breath. To the world watching. This is not just about Burkina Faso. This is about every village where silence was enforced, every border drawn in ink that bled, every deal signed with the blood of the voiceless. Then he bowed his head and whispered, "Africa, we remember now. If you also believe the truth must be spoken, leave a word for Africa below." Just as the global media began adjusting its narrative from rogue regime to regional anomaly, a tremor struck the diplomatic world. Ghana broke ranks. At midnight, President Kwame Adusei appeared in a surprise televised address, a quiet reformist, long considered a safe partner of Western development banks, but this time his words sent shockwaves. "We have reviewed the evidence presented by Burkina Faso, and we cannot unsee what has been shown. Ghana will suspend all foreign military procurement contracts pending a full investigation into regional manipulation." The African Union gasped. The EU Foreign Council went into emergency session. But Ghana wasn't finished. Furthermore, Adusei said, voice shaking but clear, "We recognize the Pan-African Tribunal's legitimacy, and we invite President Ibrahim Traoré to address our parliament next week." As an honored guest, in 24 hours, everything changed. South Africa's parliament voted to launch a regional audit of post-colonial contracts. Namibia expelled 2 European consultants. And in Nigeria, students staged campus sit-ins with one chant justice began in Ouagadougou. The plan to isolate Traoré had backfired. Instead of standing alone, he had become the axis of a movement. A mural appeared overnight in Accra Traoré in blacksmith's robes, hammering chains into plowshares. Underneath, they tried to bury us, but we were seeds. But the most devastating revelation came not from a podium, but from a printer in Nairobi. An anonymous envelope was delivered to the Daily Nation. Inside a document marked Eyes Only. Title Directive 291X, Strategic Asset Control in the Sahel, stamped by a European intelligence agency, dated 2022. Heavily redacted except for what mattered most. Among its contents, a plan to enable destabilization through controlled opposition. Budget projections for resource extraction profits post-regime change. Names of friendly local media assets pre-approved to spin intervention as humanitarian. Talking points to frame Traoré as a nationalist demagogue should he interfere. But the phrase that ignited fury across the continent was this: maintain Burkina Faso in a state of manageable volatility. Avoid full collapse, but ensure dependency persists. Within hours, the leaks spread like wildfire. Pan-African forums erupted. University professors in Senegal threw out textbooks and began live-streaming teach-ins on modern resource imperialism. In Ivory Coast, artists projected the phrase manageable volatility onto embassy walls. And in the streets of Ouagadougou, a banner was unfurled: "We are not volatility, we are victory." Suddenly, the Western narrative collapsed. Press outlets issued corrections. Editorial boards who once called Traoré radical now called him revolutionary. And a meme swept across African social media: $7 billion in weapons. But you couldn't stop one truth. And then from the shadows, a ghost returned. Colonel Jules Sankonde, once Traoré's closest strategist, had vanished weeks earlier during the height of the tribunal. Rumors spread: defection, arrest, assassination. But now he reappeared on the tarmac of Ouagadougou's main airstrip, not in chains, but holding a signed agreement from Tripoli. He had been in Libya negotiating in secret. What he brought back was unprecedented. The Sankonde Accord, a multilateral pact with tribal leaders across the Maghreb and Sahel to cut all illicit arms routes into Burkina Faso in exchange for joint investment in a pan-African infrastructure corridor. The deal bypassed all traditional financial institutions. It used blockchain, local currencies, and trust built from the ashes of colonial trauma. When Traoré met Sankande on the tarmac, he embraced him and whispered, "Why did you go without telling me?" Sankande replied, "Because I needed to know if Africa could trust us before I asked them to." In that moment, Burkina Faso didn't just survive. It ascended. No longer the target of foreign strategy, but the architect of its own continental vision. And as news of the accord spread, a banner flew from the roof of a university in Bamako. Africa doesn't need permission. Africa just needed to remember. Once a whisper in the desert, Ibrahim Traoré had become a declaration etched in fire. Mourning in Burkina Faso no longer feels like mourning. In the town of Yako, children walk barefoot through the dust, not to fetch water, but to attend school in a building once occupied by foreign advisors. In the south, an abandoned airfield has become a solar-powered hospital. And in the north, where mercenaries once passed silently, farmers now build roads with their own hands. Weapons were melted down for plows, bridges, irrigation pumps. Steel once meant for blood now raises roofs. In Ouagadougou, murals rise beside every ministry, Traoré depicted not as a general, but as a blacksmith, shaping the future from the rust of betrayal. And then came the final address. On the steps of the People's Assembly, Ibrahim Traoré stood before his people, and the world they called us unstable. They called us poor. They called us dependent. But we are none of those things. We are unbought. We are unbroken. We are Africa. His voice cracked only once when he turned to the youth in the crowd. We do not ask permission to be free. We rise because we must. He raised his fist, and the nation raised theirs in return. If the spirit of Ibrahim Traoré touched your heart, share this story. Subscribe to this channel. Join the journey of a continent that no longer bows. May God bless Africa, land of strength, memory, and unshakable will. If you believe Ibrahim Traoré is a blessing to this continent, let the world know. We are not volatility. We are victory.